think some big streamers were not able to just roam the halls, right? If they did, they'd get mobbed. Some big streamers got escorted away from the show floor by security, not to protect them, but because they're like, you can't be here. That was some members of the Dream SMP right before I interviewed them. They had been like trying to roam the show floor and then just like were stopped too much and had too many people following them.
We are joined today by Nathan Grayson, a reporter at the Washington Post, formerly of Kotaku, and Nathan has been traveling around the United States for the past week or so and change, and attended TwitchCon this past weekend, where there were a lot of various different issues that I want to dive in. I don't want to make this an entirely negative conversation, but given it's the first TwitchCon, or first major TwitchCon post-pandemic here, it is something of great intrigue. So, Nathan, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing all right.
Thank you for coming on.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you for inviting me on. I am a regular listener.
Yeah, we've seen you in space. It's always good to have people who have been listening, engaging with the content, and being able to come. So, was this your first TwitchCon, or or was this just your first one back?
Yeah, definitely my first one back. I went to the first TwitchCon forever ago, and also I think most of the other ones. I think maybe I missed one over the years, but yeah, I've been to a lot of TwitchCons.
If you had to describe what it was like being there, like overall, what was the vibe like compared to previous years?
The overall vibe was similar in that people were very excited and happy to see each other, and I think especially so after the pandemic, or pandemic's still going on, but after lockdown, there was a lot of people who either were reuniting or had, met over the pandemic via Discord or streaming together, what have you, and got to actually talk and interact in person for the first time. So there's a lot of that. People were very excited about that element of things. And then I'm guessing you're sort of asking about the vibe in relation to kind of recent events on and around Twitch. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I'd like to know that, and then we can dive a little bit deeper into more broadly too, because I went to TwitchCon in 2018, and I didn't get to go to 2019, but it seemed like this was different. I want to dive into that a little bit too. But yes, also, you do a lot of reporting on the creator space. You know the Twitch space really well, and your sort of work over the past few years. Were people kind of mellow about the compensation changes?
Yeah, I mean, my sort of like take on it is less, I wouldn't call it mellow exactly, because I think as we've seen, people continue to be pretty mad about them. That is a fairly resonant theme amongst anybody either who's streaming on Twitch or even a lot of viewers. But I think that there was definitely an overall sense that what could be done with like that fury or outrage had already been attempted online. And that at TwitchCon itself, people were just sort of like, yep, this is just how things are going to be. And so we'll keep being in this community because we care about the people that are part of it. But in terms of, let's get in people's faces. Let's change some minds. And I don't think this would have done anything, nor would it have been advisable, but let's yell at some rank and file Twitch employees. I didn't really see any of that. Mostly I just saw people being like, yeah, I'm going to enjoy being here and, talking to my friends, seeing other streamers. But yeah, for example, during the opening ceremony, right? There's a brief moment where Emmett Shear, head of Twitch, mentioned the 70-30 split and stuff like that. When he did that, especially given that the opening ceremony at least was a pretty packed hall, I was expecting people to be like, boo, or make some noise about it, right? Nothing. And he briefly mentioned that there was going to be a live version of their patch notes show in which they'd address it further. That Sunday, so that was the final day of TwitchCon, and there was, and barely anybody was there. They did on the live stream of it, right? They did a quick cutaway to show the audience because they wanted to show people cheering and stuff like that. And it was so dark you couldn't tell, but I went in that room, and it was structured such that there are chairs down the middle and two wings of chairs up the sides, and the side chairs were just nobody, and the middle area was sparsely populated. So it was just sort of theoretically, this was a centerpiece of Twitch's offering, in that the idea, at least as they told me behind announcing the 70-30 split changes when they did, was that they wanted to have a discussion at TwitchCon, that they wanted to start by making the announcement shortly before and then carry the conversation into an in-person event. But, it seems like, at least by that point, people were not really interested in having that discussion anymore.
Well, it also affects a really minor part of the website who I imagine either are exploring their options to go elsewhere or just giving up, as you sort of mentioned, and just kind of living with the consequences here, right? Like there was some reporting that I think Devin Nash originally pointed out that like 5% ish of have those 50-50 deals now versus like 20% from a few years ago. So like they've already been sort of hush hush quietly reducing the compensation paid out to top creators, and again, it only really affects top creators. I mean, I don't mind saying this. I'm a Twitch partner on the platform, and like my deal's always been 50-50. I was not in the 70-30 boat. So, and I've been a partner for like 4 or 5 years now. So yeah, I think it seems like it was only affecting the top people, and that number is greatly reduced anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the thing there, though, and like the reason there's so much outrage online is less the tangible numbers of who is being affected. Because, yeah, it was a small number of people, no matter how you slice it, and more that like Twitch took away something aspirational. That like for creators who sort of occupied the lower and middle tiers, there was at least this idea that like if they stuck it out for long enough, then they could become one of the creators on a 70-30 deal. And like that's especially key, I think, in an ecosystem like Twitch, where so much of your time is spent like chasing a certain high of like viewership or subscriptions or what have you, and then just being like, okay, now how do I not fall off? Like there's so few positive reinforcement mechanisms on Twitch. Most of them are negative. They're like, oh no, I'm losing viewers. Oh no, I'm losing subscribers. It's like always this, it's not a great feeling. And so the idea of something else out there that would just be like a, for lack of a better term, like a permanent buff, right? Or something like that. Um, I think that was comforting to people. I think that they were like, yeah, maybe I'll become one of those people one day. And of course, like the numbers don't bear that out. But I think it's pretty similar to like, it's pretty similar to like the American economy, right? That
Mm-hmm.
many, many, many people are poor, but they're still willing to support like the millionaires and billionaires of the world because they believe that one day there's a chance they'll become one, or like they believe that they uniquely are qualified to become one.
Yeah. Did this TwitchCon in any way feel a little bit more corporate than 2019 in particular?
That's let me think about it. So I mean, in terms of like structure and the way they use the convention hall, it was very similar. Like I mean, meet and greets were in the same places, all of that sort of a thing. In terms of like it being corporate, I think there was definitely a lot more like, particular streamers, bigger partners, definitely like kind of navigating TwitchCon in secret. In part because like I think that the Twitch fandom is definitely like grown, since 2020, and I think some big streamers in particular were not able to just roam the halls, right? If they did, they'd get mobbed. That was a security concern. Like some big streamers got escorted away from the show floor by security, not because of like not to protect them, but because they're like, you can't be here. This is too many people. Like that was some members of the Dream SMP right before I interviewed them on Sunday. They had been like trying to run the show floor, and then just like were stopped too much and had too many people following them. And so they're like, "Yep," they kicked us out.
Yeah, it feels like, and this is a part of the broader discussion I wanted to have about the convention and how it's changing, is that it felt like, I decided not to go this year, but it felt like compared to past years, 2019, 2018, etc., that this TwitchCon really highlighted a celebrity culture that I think has developed over the pandemic. Do you think that's like a right assumption that these streamers, this felt more like a fan event to come meet the big streamers rather than what it used to feel like, which was like networking and elbow rubbing and like a much more niche community?
Yeah, I would say absolutely to that. I mean, with some caveats, I think it still includes an element of, people like getting together to meet up with each other. But yeah, I mean, like the fan culture was on full display. Like especially amongst like the Dream SMP people. Again, like
Mm-hmm.
that was a totally new and unique experience for me at TwitchCon. I was fortunate enough to attend their panel. And I say fortunate in that a lot of people got locked out. They just like couldn't get into the room. They couldn't there was not enough space. Um, but I mean, it was truly wild Like the moment that they started that Dream and then others like Carl and Sapnap and George Not Found, people like that started walking into the room. They did it one by one, and every single one of them elicited some of the loudest screams I have heard outside of like a packed, like concert or something. Just like deafeningly loud, like cheers and applause. Um, I like literally took out earplugs and put them in because I was like, I will sustain permanent hearing loss if I sit through another minute of this. Um, and yeah, like it was the same when they were walking down hallways. Like just any Dream S&P person, if they were walking somewhere, just a flock of screaming fans would like run at them. Um, yeah, it was truly wild. But it makes a certain kind of sense in that I think that like in terms of fandom and just sort of the way that like they manifest online, like the Dream S&P community is sort of like a K-pop group or like a boy band, and so like you get a similar reaction in person. I think they weren't necessarily prepared for it, but I think if you like go back and look at how things have already unfolded online, you could probably have predicted that. But yeah, it was definitely a lot like that. And you had like, I think anytime that like Hassan went roaming around, you'd have fans of his come up and either like express adoration or like try to troll him as they would in chat. I think they tried to at one point get him to like, they're like, why don't you like debate this one guy who's like, very far right? And he was like, because I don't want to debate a Nazi, leave me alone. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, there was a lot of like, it definitely felt more like an event where there were fans there and they wanted to meet their favorite celebrities.
Well, in that way, it seemed like, and this happens at every convention, unfortunately. There are kind of horror stories of things that happen, but this one felt particularly unique in that way. I saw like one streamer who's also a cosplayer said that she, like someone, like a woman, randomly ran up and touched her boob, and like poked her in the boob, and then like I saw another video, and I don't know if this is the booth, so maybe I'm not mistaken. I didn't see what but I will say, like, I saw a video of Amaranth doing like a meet and greet, and then like almost expressed a little bit of shock because like some dude bent down and presented his ass to her to step on, which she did. Like, that wasn't the booth, to be correct, right? Like, she wasn't doing
And that was a
step.
meet and greet. That
It
is
was just
correct.
like
That
a
was at a meet and
standard
greet.
meet and greet, though. She wasn't like, I'm gonna step on people. Just to
No,
be
I do
clear.
not believe so.
Yeah. Okay. So it seemed like there was like a level of like terminally online internet behavior presented in its real life form. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, and I think like, if you look at something like, and I can't believe we're discussing this in such serious terms, but Amaranth stepping on somebody, right? That's also like it closes the loop because it's on one hand fandom, it's somebody being like, I know this creator and I want her to do something to me. But it's also like content, right? Like of course somebody like getting stepped on by Amaranth is like, you can see the video like title or the TikTok or whatever else they might make it into. Like that's also one of the elements of this whole culture that's like all at once fascinating and kind of like it can lead to some weirdness, which is that a lot of like fans are also creators, creators are fans. Like it's not so strictly delineated as like there are creators and there are fans. A lot of the people who are fans are also trying to make a living at this, or at least make a run at like doing it as more than a hobby.
And in that way, though, I feel like, and again, I didn't go this weekend, so I'm asking you, I'm relying on your expertise here. It felt like it was different than the Twitch cons of old, right? That like this was like that amped on steroids. There was always a little bit of that, sort of like fan culture. I mean, it's a gaming event, right? Like it kind of is what it is. So you expect some weird people just generally at one of these like gaming cons, but this seemed like it was that like cranked. And did it feel that way to you, that it was totally different, that something had changed through the pandemic?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't go so far as to characterize it as totally different, but definitely different. It did not feel as like, I don't know, previous Twitch cons have felt, despite their size, kind of small and chill. And like, for example, that, in some ways, like San Diego Convention Center, which is often plays host to Comic-Con, was like a little bit too big for it. But this year, I mean, very large crowds could be hard to move sometimes. Lots of people getting stuck in hallways because like this was a funny phenomenon. You'd see like one streamer with like their camera and everything getting mobbed, and their little bubble or their little mob bubble would like try to pass another one doing the same thing, and they'd sort of like get stuck together because there were too many people and it was hard to move past each other. Um, but yeah, I mean, like it was definitely different, but in sort of like immaterial ways that you could feel, but that it's hard to really entirely describe.
Yeah. They're not exactly measurable, but like I think
Right.
it was even being remote and like not being there, I think at least, you see enough tweets and videos and everything, and you're like, that's just not what I recall, right? Like that's kind of how I felt looking on the inside out. I want to talk about that more broadly because a lot of your work focuses on the streaming industry. You've done that through this sort of what I would call like creator boom that probably is tangentially related to the pandemic and people being inside, but also I think it's a shift in gaming interests, right? Like it's I'm constantly sort of at a loss of how to call it, but I think like the words I've settled on is gaming entertainment, and that is like different than esports, different than sort of gaming culture of old. And it feels like that's where the audience is going, right? That's something we talked about on the show at length with some of those people like Ludwig Ogren and Stans and Adriak and some of the others who have been on the show. Why do you think things have moved in that direction? Because I think that was also kind of noticeable in this TwitchCon that I didn't see a huge esports presentation in the same way that we have other than Rivals, but I wouldn't necessarily consider that like the hardcore traditional esports stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few factors to that. One of them is like if you're making the direct comparison with esports, just like gaming entertainers, content creators are, broadly speaking, I would say more accessible. Like, you can hop in the middle of somebody playing a game and be like, oh, they did something funny. They said something funny. Whereas, esports always comes with like, who are these players? What does this season look like? Or, like, what does this tournament look like? There's a lot more baggage associated with it, a lot more history. And then also like there's the economics of it, which is that like esports and content creation now directly overlap because esports had so much trouble making money off of actual like, teams and games and events. Instead, they were like, okay, well, what if we start contracting content creators as part of our organization to pull in money? So, I mean, like, I think you have that shift just kind of naturally because of economic reasons. Um, but beyond that, I think that the other side of it is just that, like, I think this is already happening pre pandemic, but like the content machine has sped up so much. Like, all of these platforms have become so efficient at like whatever the content of at like propagating whatever the major thing or things of the day or of the week or whatever are. And also I think that people have started to realize that like there is no line on what is content. Like once
Mm.
upon a time, I think you would look at something like, even the like Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, right? And be like, I don't know, it's like about some pretty gnarly stuff. I think that that's sort of beyond the pale, right? Maybe we shouldn't be like slicing this up and trying to turn it into something that we can profit off of. But in this day and age, there really is no line. Like anything that happens becomes content. Like the week before TwitchCon, or what week, 2 weeks, it was like all the Try Guys drama. Around the same time, it was like everything surrounding Twitch gambling, up to and including like Mizkif allegedly covering up a sexual assault. And like on one hand, people cared about these things and were interested in discussing them, but on the other hand, like it was good content. It was the thing everyone was talking about. So you talk about that or you do something with it, and your numbers go up. And so like because this whole machine is so well oiled at this point, everyone's just like a part of it, kind of whether you want to or not, right? Like TikTok, for example, was amazing at surfacing Johnny Depp Amber Heard to people who were not interested, and basically like almost forcing them to become interested, or at least forcing them to know the basic outline of it. And then that leads to checking it out on other platforms and so on and so forth until like everyone is sort of looped in on this stuff, and everyone is like discovering different creators through these different major cultural events because creators have in turn realized that this machine is so efficient, so they've got to get on board. Like 2, 3, 4 years ago, you probably wouldn't have had Asmongold, for example, talking about Johnny Depp Amber Heard
Right.
if that had happened back then. But this time you super did. Him and XQC, people like that were all in on it because, again, it was good content. It was doing numbers. Everyone knows because they measure their metrics now, which, like, again, was not as much like people would measure metrics on Twitch back in the day, but they weren't like also paying super close attention to like YouTube and Instagram and other things like that, their metrics on those platforms too, which is also like that brings me into sort of the third point, which is that now everyone is on everything. Like it is rare to find somebody in this day and age who's like, oh yeah, I just use Twitch. Like most
Yep.
of the time they're like, if you look at their Twitter bio, it's got like a link tree out to all of their different socials, all of which they post to, if they're doing well, pretty regularly with like content that is at least tailored to those platforms, if not like wholly different from what they've done elsewhere. And so yeah, it's just like everything is so efficient now, and it's wild.
Yeah, it is it's incredibly unique to this like period of time. Just like hearing you describe it in that way, it feels like in the same vein that Twitch production decommercialized and became more simple, while the sort of monetization engine of Twitch became much more commercial, right? So like, and what I mean by that is like what used to be popular on Twitch were those types of esports competitions, right? It was the sort of big budget, nice studio, whatever it may be, production. That was, and creators have been popular on Twitch for a long time, but I feel like 2020 really put that on a rocket ship and shot it in the moon, right? Where like it new heights, etc. Um, and so the production has become less commercial now. Like just chatting is one of the biggest, I think maybe the biggest category on Twitch, definitely up
Oh
there,
yeah,
and it's
yes, far and
become.
away. Just chatting is the biggest every compared to everything constantly without fail. Yep.
Yeah, and it's just somebody, XQC, Hassan, whatever, like sitting in a setup like I am, right? Like microphone, arm in front of me, webcam, some lighting, right? Like
Hmm.
that's not an expensive thing to produce. Whereas like Twitch, the platform has tried to figure out how to be more commercial, and those streamers have figured out how to be more commercial, signing with big agencies, right? Like figuring out how they monetize what they do more in a way that they did not some years ago, right? And did you kind of feel any of the effects of that shift, that like this is now, you were just started describing everything as content, right? And that
Hmm.
everything can be filmed, even the funny moments that are like parasocial and weird. But did you feel that the sort of culture around the convention, especially at a world where like at certain places you weren't supposed to be broadcasting, that things were changing in that way, that like these creators were finding new ways to commercialize what they were doing, even in an event like this?
I mean, definitely. Like, for one, definitely what you're saying is true. And like, for example, I mean, in 2019, a lot of like major streamers had already signed with various agencies, but I mean, like the presence of just that part of that world was so much more like acutely felt there. Like, I mean, to talk to any streamer, you had to like go through their agent and stuff like that. Agents were on at every party, things like that. Yeah, that side of that world is just so much more. Again, it's a more well-oiled machine. It's a more standard part of what people do. But yeah, then also like, uh, every content creator there was either like IRL streaming or posting pictures from parties that they were at. I mean, TwitchCon is content. That's why people go to it. Like, but that's why big streamers go, right? Because like mid-sized and smaller streamers go to network and to hopefully like gain opportunities from being around those bigger streamers. Big streamers just do it to be like, I'm on camera here, let's go. And to like engage with their fans and stuff like that. But it was also interesting because, and again, this was also beginning to happen in 2019, but was much more pronounced this year. There really is like basically a second TwitchCon for the biggest names, like almost any event that you would go to. Because for one, at TwitchCon itself, right, you have like partner lounges and stuff like that, but you don't really see like the biggest big names in those because they're too big and everyone, even in the partner lounge, would mob them.
Yeah.
There was like a little bespoke area in like the closest hotel that was only for Twitch partners. I actually tried to sit down and do my interview with part of the Dream SMP group there, and somebody running the lounge came over and was like, "You can't do interviews here. This is for partners only, or for like streamers only. You have to get out." So we
Wow.
like went and sat on a little circle in a little circle on the ground outside that room. It was really funny. Um, but yeah, and then like at parties, for example, like there were special like separate rooms for the biggest names only. Like the 100 Thieves party had like a little basement area, so you had like all of these other relatively important people around, like bigger stream or like semi-large streamers, people work in esports, adjacent industries, even agents, in this crammed into this bar, like shoulder to shoulder. Huge COVID risk, by the way. They shouldn't have done that. Yeah, but then you had like this secret little room that everybody knew about with like two large bouncers on either side of it being like, you can't get in here. This is like, and everyone's like, I heard Hassan's down there. I heard Ludwig is down there. Like, it's fascinating because like there's this idea, right? And I think this is like one of the main appeals of streamers and content creators of accessibility, of like they're people like you. If you ever met them, you'd hit it off because you watch them every hour of the day. and they seem just like you. So there's nothing between you except geography. Um, and so they still need to maintain some element of that, because if not, they lose their appeal.
Yeah.
However, in practical terms, if you don't have real physical space between the audience and them, they get mobbed. It's logistically impossible. And also, they don't really necessarily want that. And so, what that manifests in is a thing where, like, they're present, but they
Off
are always
guards.
a little
Yeah.
bit somewhere else compared to everyone else.
Yeah, and that's new. That was not the case when I was at TwitchCon in 2018. Even with the big people, I mean, like back then, that was like the Ninja Shroud pop off year, right? Like in 2018, and like I remember like Doctor Disrespect being there, and like even those people were accessible, right? Like they had like nice little VIP areas in like the Fortnite section for the big Fortnite streamers, but like they were kind of out and mingling even in the crowd, and it seems like that became a safety hazard for this particular
Yeah.
TwitchCon.
Oh, definitely. No, there was a time when, again, a lot of this happened with like the Dream SMP folks. They far and away had the most like
Yeah.
rabid fan base. And so like at one point I came out of the press room, which was sort of in a secluded area, and there was just a wall of human beings at like the little guard rope that led to that area. And like to the point where I was like, oh, I can't get around this. I had to like go outside and use a side path. And so I asked one of the security people, like, what's going on? What is this horde of people doing? And they were like, yeah, one of the Dream people just walked by for like 2 seconds. And there was like, it was probably at least 50 or 60 people just standing there,
Wow.
like trying to get a look. Like, you know, it again, it was just like so different. Yeah.
What you keep circling back on the Dream people. What I found really interesting about that is they're not even particularly like that group of Minecraft creators are not particularly Twitch streamers. Like they are. I don't want to say they don't use the platform at all, but that is not their primary means of content. They are primarily YouTubers, and I think I find that really interesting because it's almost like TwitchCon is becoming just like another creator convention, like VidCon or something else. You think that's right? That it's sort of
Oh
just a
yeah.
creator convention?
No, absolutely. I mean, for one, like you also had very literally, I think, I don't want to say every major streamer that moved over from Twitch to YouTube was there, but a lot of them were. Ludwig was there. Sykkuno was there. Let's see, who else did I see? I think those were the main two that I saw. But like, you know, a lot of the people who have moved over to YouTube still went to TwitchCon because like those communities now overlap more than ever. And then yeah, just beyond that, again, because everybody is kind of using every platform, it's just pretty natural that you would have fans of, or you would have people who like primarily are not Twitch streamers, or like that's only part of their operation being at TwitchCon.
Taking a quick break from this episode to have a word from our sponsors. The journey of my career has been pretty fast-paced. I started writing at 17, and within 16 months, I went from having never written a published article to landing a job at ESPN as their youngest talent hire ever. With that fast-paced career, I've often found myself struggling with imposter syndrome and with work-related anxiety. But over the past few years, seeing a therapist really helped me guide my way. And if you think you may be feeling depressed, stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed, then today's sponsor, BetterHelp, is here to help you. BetterHelp offers licensed therapists who are trained to listen and help you. Talk to your therapist in a private online environment whenever's convenient for you. And if you're like me, where it seems there's never enough time in the day, you understand how important that convenience is. There's a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's 20,000 plus therapist network that gives you access to help that may not be available in your area. Finding a therapist can be hard, but BetterHelp simplifies that experience. You start by filling out a questionnaire to assess your specific needs, and within 48 hours, BetterHelp will match you with a therapist. From there, it's easy. Schedule video and phone sessions, message your therapist as much as you want, whenever you need to, and everything you share is completely confidential. You can request a new therapist at no additional charge anytime. I've been seeing my therapist Diane for 4 years now, and when we reflect back on the progress I've made in my life for the better, it's a pleasant reminder of why I started seeking help and the goals I had when we first started working together. Join the 3 million plus people who've taken charge of their mental health with an experienced BetterHelp therapist. Get your 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/visionaries. That's betterhelp.com/visionaries.
before we do get at the fun pit, I had one question I wanted to ask you about that I forgot to mention or ask earlier is about Emmett Shear. And obviously he was did the keynote opening presentation this year as he normally does. But I remember and have heard a lot of feedback, both from streamers and from journalists and others in the media, about his Twitter feed, which is predominantly not Twitch. If you go look at Emmett Shear on Twitter app right now, for those of you listening, there's almost never a mention of it. If you start scrolling through it, it's almost like he's not there, but he is, as I understand, behind the scenes, still involved. Maybe not as much on the commercial side as some of the other people at the top of the company. But what was the vibe like there? If you had to read him by looking his presentation on stage, did it seem like he was engaged, or did it just seem like a leader who was there because it's his company originally?
I mean, I feel like it's hard to read that far into what somebody is doing on stage during a presentation. I mean, I get the impression from speaking to people that like Emmett generally cares. I think he cares quite a bit. I mean, this is like unconfirmed, but I heard from somebody that like not very long after sort of the 70-30 split announcement and the blowback to that like, somebody talked to him at an event they were both at, and he was like, he wasn't expressing contrition exactly, but he was like, yeah, I feel like we kind of dropped the ball here, and we got to do something. We got to sort of turn this around. But at the TwitchCon presentation itself, the bigger issue was that like the whole presentation was pretty by the numbers. It was very just like, we're going to walk through things that we already announced earlier and just talk about things that you all know about, things like guest star, which is like an option to take somebody out of your chat and bring them onto your stream in like a voice capacity. They did a big weird commercial for that and Overwatch 2 at the same time. It just all felt like they didn't really have much to show or announce that was exciting or additive to the overall Twitch experience. So they're just like, hey, remember these things that like we already announced that you sort of liked? Which is kind of the bigger issue in general at this point, is that, conventional wisdom says that when you take something away from people, even at a relatively small scale, if you're speaking in terms of actual tangible, like measurable numbers, as with the 70-30 split, then, the best way to kind of counteract the blowback to that is to say, hey, but we're also giving you something. Even if that's not like more money in your pockets right away, just like something cool, something to be like, hey, we're still in it for you. And they just didn't really have anything like that. And I get the impression that they sort of hope guest star will prove to be that. I think that they're looking at it as a potential like addition to the ecosystem that will have longer sort of spanning benefits. Like I heard one of the, I think it was Tom, who is their head of product, be like, yeah, I think it's going to be a major tool for discovery, which I do find interesting, right? Because his basic like theory is that people will use it to sort of, grab other streamers out of their audiences, maybe smaller streamers, put them in front of a really big crowd, and then that will like create new stars. Like if somebody like Hassan pulls a smaller political streamer up, suddenly you got like a like potential new Hassan or something. Will that actually happen? I don't know. But at the same time, when you don't know that's going to happen and you go up on stage and say, here's all our cool new exciting stuff, you can't just lean on that because it hasn't happened yet. So yeah, it was just this like very perfunctory kind of like, we're here, everyone be excited. And people were like, yeah, we're excited to be here, but we're not excited about Twitch right now because you're not giving us anything to be excited about.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think that guest star functionality, some of it already exists with Raid as well, and how raids work. Because I interviewed Ewok some years ago, and that's how they were discovered, was Tim the Tapman raids. And so like there's a little bit of that already happens on the platform, like big streamers sort of funneling into friends or other streamers and sort of giving other people platforms. It doesn't seem like, I understand how it's different. I understand it could be like more engaging, but it also just seems like it's not necessarily the top of the list feature.
I do think that actually there's something more there though, because I think that as a result of the pandemic, Twitch culture as a whole became a lot more collaborative. Like even outside the pandemic, even now that like people are interacting again in person, you see tons more overlap in like streamers doing events and things together. And so I do think that like Twitch is probably onto something here, because like you're saying, they're taking an already built-in culture of like pointing your community in the direction of somebody who is maybe smaller, what have you, and like boosting them. And then you're adding the element of actual direct interaction into that. And like, again, to bring it back to the dream group, one of the things that we see in terms of what people really latch onto are like what appear to be friendships. And so if you like create even the illusion of a friendship with a big streamer, then the other person in the friendship gets an enormous boost. So like,
Right.
I don't think they're off base and expecting big things out of that feature. It's just that has not come to pass yet, and you can't hype it up like it has.
Right. That makes sense. All right, so let's talk Foam Pit. For the people unfamiliar, because I think we should maybe explain this a little bit in the episode before we dive into the bulk of it. Lenovo was doing an activation on the TwitchCon floor that involved a foam pit, and as I sort of saw from watching a little bit of it, gladiator type competition thing. Is that right, Nathan? Sort of.
Yep, two big old
Yeah.
batons, and you try to push each other off.
So this foam pit made massive, even mainstream media headlines this weekend because a adult film star, Adriana Shekic, who is also a Twitch streamer, won in the foam pit and did a celebration dive, ass first, into the foam pit and broke several portions of her back, and has said that she has had to have surgery or has to have surgery to mend that portion of her broken back, and in the most safe for work way possible, described yesterday that it will impact her adult film work as well in a way. So obviously this became extremely viral for obvious reasons. This is somewhat of general note anyway, having a very severe injury in a way that makes everyone involved liable in some case. I've seen a lot of lawyers commentate on it. I guess was the foam pit, we'll start here. Was this foam pit activation with the Lenovo, the gladiator style thing, was this of intrigue in the first place? Like, were people actually paying attention to it?
Yeah, I think so. I get the impression that people on the show floor generally knew where it was, just because it was like this big, ostentatious display. And yeah, I think that a lot of people were like approaching it and being like, yeah, we'll give it a try, because again, it was content, right? If you are like streaming around TwitchCon, walking around with like a camera, doing an IRL stream, and you see something like that, you're like, yeah, that will be great for viewership. It'll be exciting and weird and potentially funny. I think that's why a lot of people like jumped into it and stuff and injured themselves, because like you have something like that and you could just play by its rules, or you could do a big jump and be like, whoa, that was crazy. But I mean, it was, obviously nowhere near the interest level it ultimately attained. I think it gained, hilariously, I think it got way more attention after it shut down. Because when I was like down there asking questions of the people there and, checking it out, like so many groups of people came up to like put their hand in the pit to see how deep it was and to like feel the foam and stuff. Like entire crowds of people just come up, do that, leave.
Just to be clear, was Twitch involved in that activation in any capacity? No.
Nope.
Okay, so
no, that was not theirs.
Was it a third-party vendor running it for Lenovo? What did you gain from your reporting on the arrangement of that phone pit?
Yeah, so the actual company that handled the activation directly, like built the pit, came up with the idea. It's called Kairos Media. Yeah, they are, I guess, based in the UK. Yep. Yeah, I've reached out to them directly, both in terms of I reached out to the company and also the person that I've learned is like responsible for coming up with the idea. And heard nothing back from them. I think they're probably pretty tamped down right now because they are justifiably afraid of being sued. But yeah, so that's kind of like the general idea. Then beyond that, it was it was a Lenovo Intel thing. That's what was on all the signage, and it was like they were live streaming it basically. So It was like a big pit where if you went there, you consented to appear on a live stream without any sort of pay or remittance.
The video was pretty well publicized of Adriana taking sort of the butt dive in and being in excruciating pain and trying to like crawl out of it, while commentators were like, "Oh, she's okay." She wasn't. But what was the? I mean, were you around when that specific moment happened, like on the floor, or is it something you started like?
No, I was not there.
Got it.
Yeah, no, I was not there for the moment.
What in the fallout, because it remained open even after that happened, right? The pit remained open for a certain period of time. It didn't get immediately shut down.
Yeah, I believe that she fell on Saturday, and then it was open until noon on Sunday.
Wow. And from your sort of visual appeal, the things we couldn't see on the screen, were there any impact pads or anything under the foam pit, or was it just however much foam?
It was pretty hard ground. I mean, there was like, because it was like the construction of the sides of it, it was like a pit, it was like a kiddie pool. So it was sort of like, but like the underneath part of it was very like just solid. And again, this thing was so short. Like I cannot stress how short it was. Um, it like I stood next to it to get a ballpark estimate of the size of it, and it came up to maybe a little bit above my knee.
Mm.
So like at max a couple feet tall. And like, the foam coverage was inconsistent, right? So like more toward the middle, they had the foam cubes kind of stacked up in a way that created a sort of like arching from like it arched up from the sides essentially. But I mean like especially toward the edges, just like there is no way a human being should be jumping into that. Like
Were there
even if
warning
you are
signs
relatively small, it
not
would
to?
still not
Were
what
there warning signs not to jump into it?
that I don't know, but you still have the issue of, if you're on the platforms in the middle, which is where you're doing like the combat, because you stand on these platforms, so they probably raise you off. They raise you a little bit above like the height of the edge of the pit. So that would probably put you like 3, maybe 4 feet off ground, right? Um, and so like if you fall off that, which every time somebody plays the game, the loser is going to, that's the point, then you fall into it. So I mean like I don't know if they're actually. I can probably just pull that up because I can look at the waiver. I know they had a few things that were against the rules. That was one of the other reasons they closed it down. At least as they told me, they're like we closed it not only because somebody got hurt, because people kept breaking the rules, up to including like hitting each other in the face and things like that. And so I know the waiver stipulated that you can't hit people in the face. Whether or not people were allowed to jump, it was still highly dangerous to even fall into it.
Yeah, I saw Ludwig made a video about TwitchCon in general, and he was like, even I like he belly flopped into the pit. So yeah, but made it out okay. He said, but certainly like seems like it was a danger to itself. Even if you, yeah, even a belly flop could probably result in something with a big enough human being. So
Oh yeah, no, I mean, and there were people. There's one person I talked to who just like fell in the normal way, and apparently had trouble walking for the rest of the night. So, you know, not great.
was it? There was an ankle injury, broken ankle. That was not the same booth, right? I think some people said it was originally.
There were weirdly 2 different booths with like a foam pit element.
Okay.
There was another one that was smaller, but I think maybe had a little bit more depth to it. But yeah, they did not really get much heat on them because this was definitely the bigger one and the one where more people got hurt.
That was the clipped one, the one that went like social media viral. Everybody sharing it across Twitter and other forms of social as well.
Right, of course.
Um, have you spoken to any attorneys since that injury happened in terms of like even the waiver that you have showing it to them and sort of trying to get their understanding of liability here?
I have not done that yet. That's a good idea. I've sort of been on like other TwitchCon related assignments too. I've been juggling a lot. But yeah, I mean, like my plan is to sort of jump back onto this story in the near future because I think there is a solid chance that especially once Adriana like kind of is no longer in pain and as part of her recovery, that they will probably decide to press charges in some capacity or do something on the legal end.
Yeah.
I mean, either that'll happen or Lenovo and whatever other companies will say like, hey, we'll give you some money if you decide to be quiet now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in either case, that's worth pursuing further. The impression I've gotten though from people talking about it online is that a waiver only goes so far, and if you are being negligent, then a waiver is not good enough. And I think especially given like what people have said are the standard sizes for pits like this, things like that, there's probably a case to be made that this was active negligence. So again, I think that these companies are likely, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but are probably likely open to some sort of legality.
Yeah, bare minimum. I mean, I've seen foam pits of that kind at other events, and they have sort of like the gymnastics, like impact pads at the bottom, right? Like if you go to like any like jump center or something, those are everywhere. Like they're always at the bottom of that because you hit one of those and you're okay. Like that. It has
Right.
enough padding to like kind of and it's thick enough and hard enough that you're not gonna like just hit bare concrete or whatever the flooring is in this case.
And I mean, also, like, those things are usually very deep, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, this is maybe apples and oranges to some extent, but like when I was a kid, I did gymnastics and they had a giant pit like that. And like you could get lost in it because it was deep enough that like it was like jumping into a pool,
Yep.
which is a much more sensible size for a human being to be jumping into, right? It's enough to cushion the blow before your like legs or other parts of you hit the ground.
Right. Right. Yeah. It seems it's something I'm of great intrigue for me too. Just like paying attention, especially if there is an actual legal proceeding, because it's my bread and butter as a reporter is legal filings. Yeah. So we have our first audience question. They've asked us to read this. This is from Sparta, and the question is, Nathan, do you see another mass exodus of Twitch streamers jumping ship and going to YouTube after the 70-30 split was eliminated?
Man, this is interesting to me because it supposes that there's been a previous mass exodus, which I don't think is really the case. I think we've seen a lot of like visible names, go to YouTube as a result of YouTube offering them money to do so. But the actual total number is not particularly huge. And in fact, Twitch essentially bets on this, right? That when these creators leave, like, yes, they leave, but most of their audiences stick around. And then, like, in the absence of these creators, somebody else will like rise up to fill that void. And like, for better or worse, that's largely worked out for them, right? Like, I don't think you really have the stardom of like, to use an older example, and this is actually an example that I think really informed Twitch's thinking on all of this now. You don't really have like the stardom that Tfue achieved back in the day without Ninja leaving.
Right.
Those sorts of moments where you already had a creator who was on the up and up, and then a superstar leaves, and they just become the new superstar. I have it on pretty good authority that Twitch has made a lot of decisions based on the fact that happened back in 2019. So mass exodus, not really, sort of more of just like a contained one. Will there be one as a result of the 70-30 thing? I mean, again, as much as people are threatening it, I think probably not. Because again, Twitch is where a lot of this audience is, it's where the culture is, where the community is. And also, like, the thing about people in general is that they don't really make major changes in their life unless something becomes tangibly unbearable. And because the 70-30 split only really tangibly impacts a small number of creators, I think that a lot of them are upset right now and will continue to be upset and will continue to look at this as like another nail in the coffin of like their positive feelings towards Twitch as a platform. But materially, not that much will change for them. And they will probably ultimately be like, I'm just going to stick around here. Add to that the fact that people are now broadly allowed to stream and make content on every platform at once. And that even like multi-streaming, right? You can, on Twitch, you're allowed to do, regardless of your size, on Instagram and TikTok at the same time as you do on Twitch. Why throw away that audience? Why get rid of it when you can instead multiply your audience by huge numbers just by being in many places at once? Like, there are just all these reasons to still stay on it, which again, I think Twitch is betting on. They know that after this outrage, after this like sort of dies down, that things will normalize again. And like, I wish that there was a greater recourse for streamers. You see people talking about the idea of organizing or unionizing in some capacity. Unfortunately, that's really hard when like everybody's an independent contractor, and the biggest names that can sort of make things move on that front are not incentivized to do so because they're already making bank. But yeah, I think that like I do not foresee particularly enormous change in terms of who's on Twitch and who's not as a result of this.
Well, and the bigger problem there more generally is just that we had Cecilia, your former colleague and my friend, on this pod a few weeks ago, as well as Zach Diaz, who's a former Twitch employee, and they were both talking. We talked at length about the cost it takes to run a live streaming website of this kind. There aren't many options out there. Like, YouTube is great, but YouTube has a problem for, at least for live, has a problem for live discoverability for not people who are already popular on the platform, right? And Twitch has the same problem, but it feels like because of the game directory, the way it's laid out, etc., there is a chance, or at least a little bit of a bigger chance, to make it on Twitch as a live creator versus YouTube. If you are a strictly live creator, you don't have shorts or VOD sort of aspirations, right? It's I mean, Google's the only other company that's been able to figure it out, and that's because it's a fraction of their YouTube business, which is much, much larger as well. So there's not going to be a Twitch competitor that pops up and sustains, it feels like.
Yeah. Also, the meta right now, right, is that you live stream both on Twitch and TikTok at the same time. And then you point your TikTok audience to your Twitch stream. So basically, they discover you through TikTok because TikTok is a massive discovery engine that is so finely calibrated as to make everything else seem unsophisticated. And then when you pop up on there, right, like people switch over, watch your stream, and you just like either have something on screen or like you just say like, hey, if you want a better experience of my stream, which if somebody already clicked over to you, they're committed.
Yep.
Just go to Twitch. And like that works pretty well. I know a lot of streamers who've grown pretty substantially just because they have a good TikTok presence.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that actually leads us into our next question, which is this is the time to turn up your phone, but from Chris Kovalik, who has a question about the platform meta more generally.
The nature of the question, it really did dovetail nicely into what you were just speaking about with the meta of creators going to other platforms for discoverability and then using those platforms as like a funnel back to their home base. And I'm wondering, taking this meta in mind, the fact that we talked about how at TwitchCon there's the Dream SMP people who aren't even natively on Twitch. You have the Let's Chat category, which isn't even the heritage of Twitch being gaming focused. Where do you see this trend going? Do you think that future TikTokers will live stream on a different place? Is it too early to tell what's happening? But where do you see this all going?
Yeah, I mean, again, I sort of think the direction of things is that everyone in the future is going to be an on everything creator, right? They're just like, in the sense that we view them now, there just won't be Twitch streamers, which is like sort of, I think like, but in the same way, there won't be like somebody who's like, I'm purely a YouTuber or purely a TikToker. Like already, most people just call themselves creators now, right? And like, that is on one hand like interesting from a labor perspective because it means that they have to work doubly or quadruply hard, especially when they're on the come up. That's additional work that is really hard for one person to do. It also leads to like interesting opportunities. That's why we're already seeing tons of cross-platform collaborations. YouTubers and Twitch streamers like collaborate all the time now, even when like YouTubers are allegedly exclusive to that platform. Yeah, so I mean, I think it just keeps going this way until like the idea of somebody just being purely a Twitch streamer is gone.
The follow-up I have for that is creators becoming mainstream. I think to a certain audience they already are, in most sense. But we had Ludwig on the show a few weeks ago, and he said something that sort of resonated, that like even he still has to explain his job through the lens of Mr. Beast or Ninja. That they haven't sort of crossed, like even as someone as big as him has not crossed the paradigm shift quite yet. And I think what's really interesting is we've seen these creators try other things, other mediums, right? We've seen a couple of like behind paywalls, traditional entertainment streaming type deals for some of these guys, etc. Do you think that there's a world where that works? Because I think there's a reluctance to paying for content among this audience more generally. They like to feel like voluntarily paying for content, subscribing, tipping, right? Feeling like they're a part of it, a bigger community. Patreon is the same way, that parasocial paying for something. But like if there's going to be a Ludwig documentary on Netflix tomorrow, or even a smaller platform that maybe they don't have a subscription to, do you think there's a world where this audience actually moves to other platforms for those one-off things, or is they just not going to be successful?
I mean, yeah, for one-offs, that's just a bigger ask because like part of the appeal of the platform ecosystems, like you just go there and things are reliable. The things that you want to find are reliably there. I mean, I think that like if someone is sufficiently large, sure, they could do a documentary or something, get somebody to like get a portion of their audience to go pay for it somewhere. But I mean, it would be a vastly diminished portion. It's just like if you're already, like as big as Mr. Beast or somebody, then that's fine. That's enough. Like a fraction of, millions upon millions is still like hundreds of thousands. But yeah, I mean, like I think broadly, everything still happens in this ecosystem. And like, new platforms might arise, though that's increasingly difficult given that there are behemoths who will just like take your ideas and use them as their own and then try to crush you. But yeah, I think broadly speaking, um, it mostly continues to resemble this. Because the other part is, even creators who have kind of a I don't know how you would put it, like they have more platforms that you have to go to and spend money on. Like for example, OnlyFans creators, people like Amaranth, right? Um, Talking to Amaranth, she has told me that like she views Twitch a as like a fun part of her job. She likes doing it, but what she calls it is a funnel, right? So you start at the top with Twitch, and then people funnel into your Patreon and OnlyFans. Um, and again, it's because it's voluntary. It's because it starts out free. That's just like a key part of that process. I don't think that you can't acquire new users off of just like go pay for that, because it doesn't work that way. So like those elements, the free parts of it will always be super necessary given just the way the internet works and how much of it is intrinsically, or not intrinsically, because everything has a cost, but like how much of it presents itself as free.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how that evolves for users that aren't making sort of lewd, nude NSFW content as well, because like that funnels existed for forever. Actually, the porn industry is probably the pioneer of live streaming and VOD. Like they've always been ahead of the curve. But I'll be curious to see like if that's not your beat, if that's not what you're doing as a part of your content creation in a way, like how do you get people to do that? And we've seen some successes. I mean, The Yard is like Ludwig's podcast is the second most popular Patreon, I think, last I checked, in terms of Patreon campaign. So it does work, but it feels like that funnel is still being kind of determined for a lot of
Yeah.
creators.
Well, and also it's still like, I mean, Ludwig's primary platforms are still not that, right? That's like something for people who are really into him to go do and experience and pay for. But I think it does point to something that we're going to see more and more of, which is that as people get fed up with trying to like make a living on Twitch because maybe options for doing so go away, or they feel like Twitch is really putting the squeeze on them to try to get as much money out of them as possible. People can pretty easily, especially when they already have big audiences, say, hey, instead of like donating to me or subscribing to me on Twitch, just go subscribe to my Patreon. I get a better cut over there. Just do that. And like, that will be difficult for smaller creators because that's asking for a lot. But I mean,
Yeah, it's
past
too
a
many
certain
clicks.
size, once you become large enough, a substantial portion of your audience will go do that, and like you'll make more money that way. So I think we're going to see more and more people embracing that kind of a model, or like again, giving people bonus content through those means, saying if you go do this, and I'll get a better pay split, and you'll get something you can't get elsewhere.
We'll end on this because I know you got to bounce, which is your book. You announced pre-pandemic that you were writing a book about creators.
Mm-hmm.
I've done some exploratory stuff that I've talked about before about doing a book on Twitch the business, more so from like its evolution and the history of things, because there's a lot that I think people don't know that I've already kind of discovered in some of that reporting. Where are you at? It's because I know it's kind of been delayed a little bit, but
Yeah, I
every
mean,
book is delayed.
I'll do a live announcement, I guess. Which is basically that, yeah. So my manuscript now has a final due date because, yeah, for those who don't know, the idea behind the book is that it's sort of like a behind the scenes documentary style sort of exploration of like the lives of a bunch of different streamers and other people who are like in and around that scene, with the goal of kind of creating a representative sample of like the Twitch and live streaming scene. And so each streamer represents sort of a different element of that world or that business. And the thing about that is going behind the scenes was really difficult during the pandemic. Impossible in many cases because you couldn't go anywhere. So I basically had to sit on it for about 2 years until people were finally comfortable, letting me into their homes and things like that again. So I've gotten to do a lot of that work this year. And my final manuscript is due on February 1st of next year, meaning the book will come out sometime between February and April of 2024. So yeah, that's release window, spring 2024, because books take a really long time.
Can we have any scoops on who's in the book in terms of who you've embedded with creator wise?
Yeah, let's see. So already I've done the work with let's see, I've got a list somewhere in my notes doc. It's much easier to remember that way. I'll just do it off the top of my head. Let's see, Co Carnage, Amaranth, Keffels, Let's see, Nico Lowell, Code Miko, whose names are similar. Let's see, before the end of the year, if everything goes according to plan, Hassan, Ludwig, let's see, DJ Wheat, Tawny DePass, who's a smaller creator who's nonetheless very fascinating, Nega Oryx, who's another smaller creator who's really interesting. If I've forgotten anybody, that's up to 10.
That's a lot.
And then I'm going to do a couple other chapters that are sort of focused on elements of the live streaming world that don't get talked about that much. So like moderating, things like that, the sort of invisible labor that makes it all work, essentially. So yeah, that's kind of the basic outline of it. It's going to be really cool. I'm super excited because it's been a lot of really, really eye-opening conversations, as it turns out. And, you know, not to denigrate what you're doing here because you're doing really good work. But like having conversations over video and over the phone only goes so far in a lot of cases.
That's true. Yeah.
It turns out if you just go to meet somebody where they are, especially in an environment where they are comfortable, they'll tell you a lot of really interesting stuff, and really dig deep into what it means to do all of this and live this life. And I think that like the cool thing about this book that will hopefully kind of future-proof it, even though it's going to be like, you know, things that I learned in 2022 coming out in 2024, is that like it's really turned out to be a lot of people in really pivotal moments. So like, you know, moments that decided the future of their careers, moments where they weren't certain about what was going to happen next, or moments where they realized what they actually wanted to do versus what they had been doing. And I think there's always something to that. There's always something to be gleaned from it that you're not seeing on camera because they're not talking about it. They're just going and being live every day. And I think it's also kind of a snapshot of this moment where Twitch, again, maybe is kind of making itself slowly irrelevant, or at least pushing itself to a point where creators are no longer as enamored with it as they once were. So, you know, we'll see what it turns out to really fully be about when I sit down and write the thing in a couple of months. But that's the basic outline.
Well, we wish you well in your Scrivener drafts, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast on somewhat short notice and talking to us about what happened at TwitchCon. Thank you all for tuning in. We will be back early next week. We'll be announcing the guests, so follow the Overcome Twitter account. And Nathan, again, thank you very much.
Thanks for watching Visionaries on YouTube. For more content, please subscribe to the Overcome channel.